It's in the name.
Welcome into the Helping Healing Humor with Ben and Travis podcast. I'm Travis Creasy, and along with me is All-Pro counselor Ben Hayes.
Howdy, partner. Always good to spend a little bit of time with you after a long day at work and do a little podcasting.
And you know, there's no telling what we will find ourselves doing between ministry, your counseling, my podcasting, social media, and of course, our wonderful wives and kids. Sometimes I ask myself, how do we do it all? And my response is usually not very well. And it's very easy to get overwhelmed, especially when you have as hard a time to say no as I do. And then I get you to come along with me or try to talk you and convince you into going. And you're usually hard to tell me no. So with that overwhelming feeling, I have come across something that has helped me focus and become more efficient. And that is called Magic Mind. I started drinking these green shots of goodness in the mornings, and I've noticed a boost of productivity throughout the day.
Yeah, Travis, Magic Mind didn't make me jittery, and I didn't have the usual mid-afternoon crash. And that's probably because Magic Mind includes something called matcha that extends the benefits of caffeine by slowing your body's ability to absorb it and prevents the spike in cortisol levels. It also includes nootropics or nootropics, which helps offset some of the symptoms of ADHD.
And anyone who knows me well, like you do, Ben, knows I need all the help I can get with that. I took my Magic Mind before my first cup of coffee in the morning, and some of the ingredients in this blast of mind juice, along with matcha, include fun things to say like ashwagandha, which I probably couldn't even say without taking the drink. And that reduces stress and anxiety. Lion's mane mushroom that reduces inflammation, prevents neural degeneration, and stimulates neural regeneration. Whitney and I tried it together, and she was able to power through a major work project in a noticeably shorter time, and it has been a game changer for us.
So does that whole neural regeneration thing mean that it makes us smarter, Travis? Because if that's the case, we could probably use a pretty big boost of it.
Oh, yeah. Sign me up for that. I need all the help I can get in that category as well.
Well, if you're like us and you want a little help in that category or some of these others that we've talked about, you can go to www.magicmind.co/healinghumor and get up to 56% off your subscription for the next 10 days with our code HealingHumor20.
Yeah, you can find out all the information about these awesome, powerful little drinks that have helped us tremendously at magicmind.co/healinghumor. You can get up to 56% off your subscription for the next 10 days with code HealingHumor20, all caps, all one word, at checkout. We'll get right to our discussion after this short introduction.
This episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast is brought to you in partnership with benandtravis.com.
So, Ben, today we decided that we're going to talk a little bit about depression, something that is a word that gets used a lot, but maybe we have a misunderstanding, and we throw out some of those things, those words from time to time. We've talked a little bit about anxiety last time Lonnie was on the podcast, and obviously that brings up someone we are praying for and we hope is getting better and progressing. Obviously, we want to send out a shout out to Lonnie and Jackie. Take an episode and kind of talk about depression. Maybe you could give us some insight into what depression is. I guess that's the first question to ask. You know, what is depression? And I'm sure there are varying degrees, a spectrum, as so many of these things have for depression. So what do you got for us just to kind of clear it up, let us know what it is, and maybe what's currently being done, or maybe some things that are being talked about in that arena?
So you're right. It's a huge, it's a huge thing in our nation anyway, or in our world, I guess I should say, but it's also a pretty huge spectrum. You have people who obviously, thinking about our friend Lonnie and, other people who go through health scares and health struggles and loss of loved ones and things like that occur. Those sorts of things can certainly cause depression. They're almost what you call situational, and it's understood. Our body and our mind is, goes through things like that, it's very difficult not to have some depression. Then you have, other kinds of depression, what even range from what we would call like the blues, somebody feeling kind of down and out. They've had a bad day. They've struggled with some things. There have been some things that just maybe haven't gone their way, lately. Some mindsets that people have sometimes can contribute to those sorts of depressed thoughts. And then, you have some who, and there's probably lots of things in between these. I'm just kind of giving you range wise, but then you have some people who have, what would be more, chemical depression, where you have, certain chemicals in the brain that are not being distributed in the right way. And, that's a kind of depression that it's hard to just talk that out. It certainly helps to have counseling in any of these situations. But sometimes there's a need for some medication that can make up some of those gaps in what's being, chemically given to the brain. And so there's a very, it's very important sometimes for people to have that, because when it comes to depression and situations like that, you've got, if the brain's not getting what it needs, it becomes more, a physical medical issue that needs to be, taken care of in that way. So those are all, it's a pretty wide spectrum, but something that might be helpful just to know that there's different forms of it.
We oftentimes, and we've seen a meme kind of floating around, when it comes to anxiety, depression, and some people, the Christian response they've kind of shown is you just need to pray more. And while that is true, it's not very helpful, because we all need to pray more. Like that's kind of, it's when the preacher gets up and goes, well, we need to be unified and we need to love each other, and everybody would amen that. But how? What are the practical ways? And I'm sure there are techniques to prayer, and I hope in the next few episodes or in the next coming weeks, we'll spend some time on different prayer and different levels and different ways practically that prayer can help. But like I said, it's not really helpful to say, well, you need to pray more. Well, that would be true all of the time. We could all pray more. But before we get to practical things that you might can give us, what are some symptoms, I guess, of depression that we might can see?
The way people kind of change, the way, certainly I always tell people to look for certain things that change in their behavior. If, whether it's their eating habits or what they are interested in, what they want to do, those sorts of things tend to be things that I tell people to look for. If they're not wanting to go out, they're not wanting to do stuff with friends, their grades are dropping. If they're in school, their work, they don't want to go to work. They're eating some of their eating habits, whether more food, less food, whatever. You just look for some changes in their behaviors. I think obviously there's a lot of times that we notice when someone is depressed. We can tell by just their mannerisms, by what they are interested in and that sort of thing, or what they're no longer interested in is many times what the situation is. So I think, you have to look for that. You have to just think, okay, what's different? And if there is something different going on, then maybe I need to, ask some questions, talk to them, find out what it is that has changed, or, what's different. And so I think all those things are important to, take note of. It's all a little different depending on, who you're talking to. Teenagers are going to be a little bit different than adults are when it comes to the symptoms and things like that. You may see it a little bit differently with teenagers, but certainly, just looking for those changes is always important. So, it's kind of a lack of interest, changing appetite, sleep patterns, blaming self, talking negatively about self, sadness, hopelessness, inability to concentrate. And of course, you get into things like morbid thoughts or school performance and that sort of thing, social withdrawal or boredom. Those are just kind of the list of things that you might look for in symptoms.
I think you nailed one of the helpful things is being attentive to these things showing up. And I think I'm chief of centers when it comes to being on my phone all the time or on my computer. And I think that's one thing that's affecting us all, obviously, as technology increases, that maybe we are not attentive to people. And so maybe we're less able to pick up on those changes when somebody has some of those symptoms that you just mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of just life in general, but especially of being in the helping profession, being in ministry, is just being aware. Favorite passage I talk about a lot, Titus, chapter 3 and verse 14. Our people must learn to engage in good deeds and to meet pressing needs, so that they will not be unfruitful. So they must learn to engage and meet. I can't engage in good things or engage in good deeds and meet pressing needs unless I'm paying attention, unless I know what those needs are. And so looking for that, addressing it, we've mentioned maybe on the podcast, maybe in some of the other stuff that you and I have done, you're not going to make someone suicidal by asking about it, but you may save somebody from it. I know, Lonnie has talked about just their response sometimes to that word helps you, if they kind of hesitate and delay, there may be some thoughts of that rolling around. And of course, depression in its, very extreme situation, in extreme cases, oftentimes leads to suicidality. So certainly, a serious enough topic that needs to have some attention given to it.
Not certainly
podcast, but in the church.
Yeah, certainly. That's what I was about to say. Certainly promoting a culture of it's okay to talk about those things would be a huge shift for a lot of our churches. But I have seen places where it's done very well and people are very open. I know at Riverside, we have share time every Sunday where we're going to pass a microphone and you have to almost turn it down. Like you have to be like, no, I don't have anything to share. We kind of go around the room. Now, there's not a lot of people owning up to depression or anxiety, although we do have some. And we pray, we don't pray for everyone by name every Sunday, but it is on a list that goes out to all the churches, of all the members of the church. And so there's this promotion of the culture. And obviously that's what we're trying to do here with this podcast, that, you and I love to have a good time. We generally are having a good time, especially if we're near each other. But that doesn't really mean that someone's not struggling or having a hardship. In fact, there are tons of examples of the life of the party being the very one who needs the most help or needs a shoulder to cry on. But you also mentioned the willingness to be open. So there's that too that's reciprocal. We have a culture that it's okay to be open, but also the person willing to open up about it so that someone knows that they're struggling. And so those kind of go hand in hand. But then probably the most difficult of all that then is asking questions simply, how are you feeling? How are you doing? And I mean, really, how are you feeling? Yeah. Not a 10-second synopsis.
Yeah. And are we really interested in their answer?
Yes.
Is it one of those, or I really want to know whether you're doing okay or not. And I know that there's a time and a place for all of that. There's times I ask people, how are you doing? And I don't expect a long answer.
And there's a relationship that has to be developed for a lot of that as well.
I mean, you've probably been in the situation I've been in where there's oftentimes, you're sitting in a restaurant and you ask the waiter or waitress, how you doing? And then they sit down at the table and talk to you for 30 minutes. And you're like, I didn't realize that was going to go there. But, that tells me too, though, in those moments when that's happened, I've thought, when they've walked away, I've told my wife, that probably was something they needed. Nobody else has listened to them.
Yes.
And, we have literally had that happen in restaurants before. It's not just a joke. I mean, it has happened. And so I think somebody asking and they found an ear that would listen. And that's happened on many occasions with a lot of people. It's just, are we willing to listen for a minute and want to know, or want to hear them, and they know that we want to hear them.
If you're trained or you have that spiritual gift or maybe have both, people will tell you a lot of things about them if you're attentive. And once again, I'll make the mention that usually I'm kind of asking the question to just make sure it's not too quiet. So probably I don't get in my own feelings, but yeah, taking those times. And I think that was originally what Bible class was about. I think it was about an opportunity to share, not that you shouldn't be studying the Bible, but if you're studying the Bible properly, I think some of that stuff comes up. A lot of times I have people that come and want to know what I teach for Bible, and we have a 4-year curriculum that we work through the Bible 3 or 4 times. If you go to Riverside, all of your educational through high school. But I tell them, I said, we cover every topic. I mean, everything's relevant because the Bible touches on those things. And you just be amazed, or you wouldn't be amazed. You know how this works, but other folks would be amazed. And this is public school as well. I mean, what kids will tell you.
Oh, yeah.
If you, even sometimes when that's not what you're hunting for, stumble across and you're like, whoa, okay, I didn't know that was going on. And maybe some of it's not any of my business, but I'd much rather you tell me than suffer alone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the thing that you run into so many times is people just need to be heard. And if you just, I think I've mentioned the book, How to Talk So Your Kids Will Listen and Listen So Your Kids Will Talk. There's an art to getting people to talk to you. And or at least, I don't know if it's necessarily getting people to talk to you or just, people being comfortable to talk with you. And so when when they say something, we can very quickly shut people down by going, well, you shouldn't have that thought. Somebody comes to you and says, I'm feeling depressed. Well, you shouldn't
Pray
be.
more.
Pray more. Or, oh, you've got everything going for you. Why are you depressed? Or, anything like that discounts the thought. Probably shuts it down, not in a good way. It shuts it down, and they're not going to talk to you anymore because, well, they don't understand. So, when someone says, I'm depressed, I'm lonely, I'm frustrated, I'm hurting, then you kind of giving some affirmation to that or understanding that feeling, helping them explore it more is more the appropriate response. So, if they're yelling or they're crying or they're whatever, even just a simple statement like, I can see you're upset, opens the door for them to continue to talk.
Yeah.
I can see that's bothering you, and let them just talk some more. And, yes, I understand, I see, wow, things like that. Just little words like, wow, and I see, and some of those things just, it allows them to continue to talk. And
well, in my experience, and you're the all-pro counselor here, but from a spiritual standpoint, there are very few people who would just outright refuse to pray with you. And so when I find myself in those conversations and I don't want to say the wrong thing and I can't be silent, which is a lot of the times, then I want to end that conversation with a prayer, and I want to pray in such a way like the tax collector. I'm not praying as though I have this superpower that they don't, because they can pray without me, and hopefully they are. But that's a way that kind of, in my mind, it kind of equalizes everybody. Like, yeah, you have this struggle and I have this one, and we are praying to an almighty God, which we are all equal in the eyes of, and he loves us equally, and he knows our struggle. And so that has been an area where prayer to me has been very helpful. When it's kind of a awkward situation, you certainly don't want to say the wrong thing. Most people are not going to turn down a prayer in the right context, which is most, I think. So.
Well, and when it comes to, I prayed with clients today. They are open to it and wanted to, and going through struggles, and even in the midst of their tears, they were wanting to pray about it, pray about the situation they found themselves in, and so very much depressed, for some of those reasons we talked about earlier, tragedy or whatever, that was totally understandable to be going through some depression, but still wanted to pray, and hopefully found comfort in that as well. So
I think it's interesting that you pointed out. I mean, there are certain circumstances that the expectation should be, and should be the normal response, is to be depressed or down, or however you technical term you want to use it. I don't want to use anything that would belittle or lighten the importance of that. And so I think sometimes I think of, and I meant to say this earlier, you and I, we kind of fall on that line between, I don't know, are we Gen X? Is that what we are? I know, not real sure, but it's like,
I don't know.
We kind of land in that area where, our parents and their parents were the do not, I mean, we suffer in silence. We're just, no one's going to know that we have a problem. And then the generation behind us and on down is like, no, you should tell everybody everything, regardless of if they ask or not. And so it's kind of like, that's my difficulty, because I see the benefits in kind of the both. And so I think if you meld them, there's a response in there. But, at the end of the day, don't suffer in silence. Like, I think about some of the stuff my grandparents dealt with, and their society just, hey, that's how you deal with it. You just internalize it and you never let it out. And man, I've gotten to the point where I err on the complete other side of that a lot more.
And you mentioned our grandparents. Our grandmother was extremely depressed, and it was a medical, it was one of those extreme situations where she wasn't going to pray it away. She couldn't.
Was a prayerful woman.
She could, yeah,
loved her Bible,
and very godly woman, but probably struggled with bipolar. From what me looking and seeing what was going on, that's probably what she struggled with, and had a very extreme kind of roller coaster from depression to feeling good sometimes. And so it was pretty cyclical, and we saw it very often. But for her, there was a lot of support. There was a lot of love, a lot of family members, a lot of family members in our family, people taking care of her and helping her and loving her through it. So even in those moments when it was so difficult and so hard, having people around you is a benefit. And they may not feel like having people around them, but sometimes just having those people anyway is important.
I think I've got a few people that would be up in my business, whether I wanted to be in my business or not. And you may be one of them there, Ben. But
might be.
So if you had some practical things, what are some things that, obviously I'm not a medical doctor. I can't prescribe medicine, and I can always refer somebody to a counselor. But are there things that regular Joe Schmo, Travis Creasy could do maybe to help? Or if I'm feeling those sort of things, other than, of course, reaching out and letting somebody know, are there some things I could do for someone or I could do for myself that would help?
Just make sure that you reach out, whether you see it in someone else or if you're struggling with it yourself, that you reach out and that you try to, not keep it to yourself. I think, one of the classic biblical examples that we see is, Elijah, and he goes in 1 Kings 19, he goes to the mountain, leaves everybody, then leaves his servant, then goes up into the mountain all by himself. And it's like he withdraws. And in those moments where you want to withdraw, in the moments where, you want to stop eating in the moments where you want to do some of the things that sometimes we think will help us. They're actually probably, or we just don't feel like doing. It's those very things we really need to do. And so I think keeping people around you, staying active, keeping a regular diet, sleeping well, getting on a regular sleep schedule as much as possible. Because, I mean, you and I know, I mean, you get grumpy and I get grumpy when we don't get enough sleep. And I know grumpy and depressed are two different things, but it certainly impacts the way that we feel. So I think the first thing that you kind of think about is, even if I don't feel like it, what are the things that are good for me to do? Get around people, and then specifically find some people who can help, whether that's going to your doctor and saying, Doc, I'm depressed. I'm not feeling right. I'm not feeling myself. I'm having thoughts that I'm not comfortable with, whatever those things may be. When you start experiencing or seeing with your friends, experiencing things that change in their personality, change in their habits, change in the things that they enjoy doing, downhill with their work or with their schoolwork. That's, I think, when you jump in and go, hey, we need to go talk to somebody. And it might be a doctor, it might be a counselor, it might be both. Sometimes it's necessary to have both. Sometimes it's just fixing some of the ways of thinking. David Burns wrote a book called Feeling Good, the New Mood Therapy, where he sort of talks about the medical or the medicine part of it, and says sometimes we throw medicine at depression that might not need medicine, that it's just the easy way to put the medicine, to do the medicine. I agree that a lot of times it's needed, but there probably are some times that we just go, I ain't feeling right, so I'm going to take this medicine to make it go away, but we never resolve the things that are causing it. So if there's some ways of thinking, or there's some things around you that you're involved in, or seeing, or whatever it is, or can't quit seeing in your mind that you've dealt with, those are some times that you probably should see a counselor if there's just reoccurring thoughts that you're just struggling with. And a lot of times it's both. There even people who take medicine also sometimes need some help in just learning some coping skills. So in David Burns' book, he talks a lot about cognitive distortions, which are what he calls, we have nicknamed stinking thinking, just ways that we think about certain things that oftentimes make us more depressed. And I noticed when I read that book that there were things I was doing, and I've since tried to catch myself when I start doing them, just kind of get back in the right frame of mind.
This episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast is brought to you by Heritage Christian University. The mission of Heritage Christian University is simple. We aim to advance the churches of Christ by equipping servants through undergraduate and graduate programs. HCU produces effective communicators of the gospel, focusing on evangelism and a commitment to Scripture. Heritage Christian University offers the following degrees: Associate of Arts in Biblical Studies, Bachelor of Arts in Biblical Studies, Master of Arts, Master of Ministry, and a Master of Divinity. HCU is accredited by the Association for Biblical Higher Education. Since 1968, Heritage Christian University has offered affordable degrees in biblical studies, allowing graduates to thrive in their ministries without the burden of loan debt. For more information about Heritage Christian University, visit www.hcu.edu.
Ben and Travis Racing shirt. Question of the day. That's right. You can get your own Team Ben and Travis Racing shirt at CYC and pick up a copy of Reframing Hope. Together, combo deal. You can order that at benandtravis.com/store. So the Team Ben and Travis Racing. Question of the day is this, Ben.
Okay.
What has been the best thing that you've gotten for Valentine's Day? Or what is the best gift you have ever given for Valentine's Day? And it doesn't have to be to Kenya. It could be to your kids or that stuff. See, I got little Haley. Her birthday is on Valentine's Day. So I get a cheap but great answer. I guess not cheap, but easy. because Haley's a kid and she's expensive. But the best gift I ever got for Valentine's Day was little Haley. So there you go. Also
Well,
an Easter gift, because that's when they came to our house. But
I mean, that's probably not going to get beaten. So, two things. One would be mine and Kenya's first date was on February the 12th.
nice.
I hope I got that right, or I'll be in a whole heap of trouble.
She doesn't listen.
But yeah, that's true. But I'm almost positive I'm correct about that. So our
Awesome.
very first date was on February the 12th. So, right before Valentine's Day. So I'll say that her coming into my life was the
Boom.
best Valentine's Day present
Man,
ever
all
been given
kinds
to
of
me.
brownie points on this episode today. Well, they can't say that we didn't give them a heads up, because this is going to come out well before Valentine's Day, but it also removes our excuse for not having something ready to go. So I won't
True.
ask if you have something already, because I figure we're all in the same boat. But if you don't have something already, like I mentioned, you could get the combo. You could get yourself a t-shirt, fellas, and get your wife a copy of Reframing Hope, Our Journey Through Cancer, Adoption, Love. Or ladies, I know we have a ton of awesome women who listen to this show. Get the combo. Buy yourself the book. Buy him the t-shirt for Valentine's Day. And we'll all be happy. You'll be happy. We'll be happy. We'll all be happy. But Ben, I appreciate your input there on the topic of depression. Obviously, it's something that all of us have been impacted, either personally or by those around us.
Thanks for being with us for this episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast. Be sure to download our free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living, at benandtravis.com and receive all of our Helping Healing and Humor extra content directly in your inbox. We look forward to having you join us at the same Ben and Travis time, same Ben and Travis channel.